we are looking at harnessing the out-of-the-box features to automate an expense solution. So this is part 2. So in the first session, we built our form and took our fields from our form and published them up to a list. And that's going to now be the foundation for everything else that we're doing. In this session, we are going to look at, oh, here's my contact information. You guys can get that. I also have some cards up here if you guys want to get that. But in this session, we're going to talk about this idea of composite solutions, and then we're going to really show that through the use of Visio services, how we display information, and how we can create an interactive experience. And so the idea behind composite solutions is really the ability to take the best of all of the solutions that we already work with and pull them together into one complete solution. So when we look at Visio services, what do we typically use Visio for? Well, visually mapping out a process that people need to follow. So we have a lot of times that people open Visio, they expect it to guide them through the entire solution of what they're doing. So imagine if we could combine that with the power and the functionality of SharePoint behind the scenes so that they could get the best of both worlds. And that's kind of this idea behind composite solutions, is building it so that they can get the best of things. So we're going to be looking at Visio services. And our goals in this is we want to utilize our existing Office tools. We already know what Visio is. We already know how to use Visio. So let's utilize the tools that we already know. We want to create a rich, interactive solution for our users so that they can work with the tools that they already know, whether they know it's Visio or not. They kind of get this experience. And then we want to help provide some visual aids for our users, because everything we do in SharePoint is really about getting the data, giving users a context, and then driving them to action. So it's really what we want to do with our solutions is have this ability to drive them to action. Okay. So we're going to go back and attempt to look at our final solution, the one that we were just looking at a few minutes ago, and hopefully the stars will align and everything will be working now. So we have our expense request system that we're going to be looking at. Just thinking. Unbelievable. All right. We're not going to click that and wait. We're going to just stay right here. Okay, so we have our solution that we're looking at. This is an expense dashboard, and on the home page that's not letting me load, we can see all of the information about the forms that we're submitting. On this page, we have an approval dashboard. And what we want to do in this page is give our executives the ability to see visually the process for the things that they're trying to do. And then at the same time, when they click on these different items, so if they come over here and they click on new request, see if it will click on new request, we want them to be able to see all of the requests that have been new. So they may come into a monthly meeting, and instead of having to go through and have all of this visual stuff, they can click on these different items. They can see the items that are there. So we see the different items that have been here. And then through automation of process, they're going to be able to process an expense report, or they're going to be able to schedule the payment. So we're going to give them data and then drive them to the action that what we want. So in our next session, we're going to talk about the workflows that are that action that we finally want them to take. In the first session, we talked about, well, we're collecting this data, and now we're talking about a way that we want to present it. And so one of the things that I like to do is use Visio for this. And so Visio services, you have to be running SharePoint Enterprise, and then once you're doing that, you can integrate and interact with Visio services. What I want to show you guys first is what most people think Visio services is. Most people think that Visio services is a way to take a Visio diagram and put it on a page so that everyone can see the Visio diagram. So a web view of Visio. Okay, so how many people kind of have that's their idea of what Visio services is? Mine too when I first got started. And so when you consider that, it's not really that powerful, because Visio has this concept of wallpapering. And what I like to consider is when you go into a conference room and Visio has been printed out and it's pasted up all over the walls, that's your Visio wallpaper. Does anybody have any Visio diagrams that are that big? So then when you start to say, okay, we have all of these large Visio diagrams, what value could there possibly be of then putting them onto a SharePoint site? Well, not a ton of value if all you're going to be doing is displaying them. So this is a Visio diagram. And if we open this up inside of Visio, and to save us the pain of waiting for me to open it, I opened it prior. It's just a basic Visio diagram. When we go to save it, we go to save as, we're going to see that we're saving it as a web drawing file. And that's the secret of doing this inside of Visio 2010. When we save this as a web drawing file, then we're able to reference it inside of one of the Visio web parts. Okay, it's not gonna, we're not gonna wait on that. You guys can just trust me on that one. Okay, so once we do that, if we're gonna come over here and we can try to edit the page, we're going to see that we have a Visio web part on the page that's going to basically allow us to point to that file that we have saved inside of a SharePoint library. So we have a Visio diagram, we save it as a web file to a SharePoint library, and then we are able to use the Visio services web part. Okay, so saved as a web drawing. It finally decided to come up. So when this comes up, if it comes up, we're going to see that we're just pointing to that file. So that file is saved right here inside of this library. So nothing too special. You just have a Visio document saved as a web diagram, and then it's pushed up into that library. Then we're able to use the different web parts to display the data. So let's actually go back into the presentation. I must have closed it. So we are going to talk about this idea of describing process. So that's the one that we just did. That's nothing more than a visual aid to help people understand what are we doing in the process. So this is one way that we can put this on the page to say, hey, click here and you'll see the entire process of what's going there. It's going to push information to people. But the other thing that we can do is we can use it to drive process. And this would be when we want to give a visual representation of something that we can then use that to educate users and have them actually act on something. And so we want to use the tools that are common and familiar to just enhance the things that we already know. So we're going to use Visio. There's a difference between Visio Premium and Visio Professional. You have to love Microsoft. Every time we come out with a new product, we come out with a new licensing SKU as well. Visio Premium is everything SharePoint. So we can do Visio diagrams, have SharePoint connections, and then we can build workflows and visually show our workflows, and we have workflow templates when we're running Visio Premium. If we're running Visio Professional, we can just have files that we can save as web drawings that we can reference inside of the web parts, but we don't get the extra workflow templates. So it's a hit or miss which one you want to have. There is a significant enough price difference between Premium and Professional that usually if you want Premium, you have to justify it to somebody because it's a little bit painful to get purchased. We're going to use the Visio Services web part, and we're basically going to put it on any SharePoint page. So a couple of different ways that you can do this. There's a lot of different things that you can do inside of Visio. Most users that I know use this to really give a visual representation that they want to link back to SharePoint data in a list. So good friend Visio. So we're going to build a document in Visio. We're going to save it as a web drawing, upload it to SharePoint, add the Visio web part to the page, and then configure the web part to use our uploaded document. So it's pretty simple when we do that. A couple of things I want to show you inside of Visio. So if we had a new Visio drawing, so we can really build anything here. These little shapes over here, putting things together. connecting them just like you would inside of Visio. Something I want to show you is when we start looking at the design of the site, there's a way that you can come over here and say for your entire drawing to fit to the drawing. So if you're looking at doing something that just has a couple of steps, you can really visually impact it here so that people can see just those different pieces. Beyond that, you would simply save it and then reference it. The real power comes in when we start looking at driving process. So this is our diagram where we want to drive process. And what we've done on this diagram is that we have connected the shapes in the diagram to a list inside of SharePoint. What this allows us to do then is whenever I click on a shape, I'm going to pass its associated value to another Webpart connection. Okay? So when you think of databases and you think of structures, you end up realizing that there's a common element or a key that kind of links everything together. In our case, we've created a list inside of our solution that's going to link things based on a filter. So what we're saying is here's the title, and here's the actual filter value. The reason that we've done it this way is our title, if you notice, is all of the shapes in our Visio diagram. So what we're saying in this list is if they hit this shape in the Visio diagram, we want it to show up and filter to what's actual, or filter to these different statuses. Then in all of the other lists that we're looking at, so if we go look at expense request, we're going to see that they have a column for status. It's not showing up in this one yet. Request status. Notice that that's similar to what's in the list. It's because it's a lookup to that list as well. We can also come over here and we can see our tasks. We can see based on that. We can also, if we look at all site content, we have got a list called additional information. And when I click on that, you see that there's filter values associated with each one of these.
So when you mention the shapes to the list, is that with the premium?
No, you can do that with professional. Yep. So we can link these shapes together, and then we're going to use connected web parts so that when I click on a shape, it's going to filter all of the other web parts on the page. So we most likely are already doing this already. Do you guys use lookup columns to say, I have a document and I want to associate it with these tasks, or I have a task and it needs to be associated with this project? We already do a lot of that anyway. So what we're going to do now is create a way inside of Visio that we can help them drill down to that level of information. Okay? So inside of Visio, we are going to go through the process of linking data to shapes. And I can click on this, and I can go to an Excel workbook, Access Database, SharePoint Foundation List, SQL, or other data connection. Okay? So something to be said about this. Are you guys all familiar with the double hop inside of SharePoint? So SharePoint security, and this isn't even really SharePoint security, this is web security, server security, all of these different things. When I'm on a server, I can only hop to one other server to get data. I cannot access a server and go all over the network and get all of the data that I want and come back. I can only do a single hop. In SharePoint, a single hop is accounted for just in the basic configuration. So for instance, if your data source that you're trying to connect to is not on the same SQL box that your SharePoint data is on, it's going to be considered a double hop. Unless your environment is configured with Kerberos, you'll get an error when you actually try to use the data on the server. So you'd end up in one of those scenarios that it works on my desk, but it doesn't work when I actually publish it on the server. So not necessarily a big deal. Your system admins can run everything in Kerberos mode if they want to. So how I recommend that you deal with this is if you have a data connection that you want to connect to, your very first thing you should do would be going to talk to your system administrators and finding out, where does this data live? How can I connect to it? Am I going to be able to connect to it without performance issues? Different things like that. So this is another one of those. Just because you can doesn't mean you should. If you connect to a data source that's huge, you're going to have issues. I mean, there's a lot of things that you should consider when you're doing it, but you can connect to them. Most of the time, I connect to a simple SharePoint list. So we can come here, we can say next. It's going to remembers the URL from where I'm at. It's going to contact the server for information, and then we're going to pray that it works. Actually, we're going to just cancel because we've already got it right here. Once we have it, what you'll see is we can take our row and we just simply click on it and associate that with it. So then everything in that list item, that row that we're pulling over, is now also associated with that shape inside of my Visio diagram. Okay? We can use what's called a data overlay, so in data graphics, to show different values about it. So most of the time I put none. Let me highlight that shape and put none. Okay. But this is also how you could do KPI inside of a Visio. You could have a shape and have it have red, yellow, green based on values in the SharePoint list. So if I was to do a data graphic and say create new data graphic, new item, choose a field, these are my fields from the list. So I could come say, okay, well, a filter value, let's display it as an icon set, that I can say if it equals these different things, then I can display those shapes over it. So it gets very cool because you can start to visually give people data that isn't stored in Visio, but it's all associated anyway, because that's how we naturally work. How do you automate a process? You usually take something that somebody drew in Visio and you automate it. So this is just giving them a way to interact with it with the tools that they already have. Okay? Once I do that, I simply save this document back to the SharePoint site, just like I did the other, as a web file. Okay? Now, when I'm on the page where that one goes, we have quite a few web parts on this one. So instead of simply showing one element of it, we're going to show multiple web parts. So remember I had a list called additional information, and I have my expense reports. And what I want to get to is when I click on an item on this chart, I want to see all of the items associated with that value, because then I know what actions do I have to take on the different items. I know if they're new, I have to approve them. I know if they've already been approved, I have to schedule them for payment. I can see, okay, well, what have we authorized? So if I'm in a meeting with a group of people trying to make decisions and we need to quickly get through these different pieces, we have this guide where we can click on the shapes and go see the different values of data. So this is also a really good use in a project plan. What are my different things in the different phases of the project, where I can go click, okay, show me everything from this phase. Show me everything from here. There's lots of different things that you can do with this to kind of show that data. The trick to doing it inside of Visio is inside of this Webparts. You see, expose the following shape data as items to be Webpart Connections. So do you guys recognize what that is? That's the column from the list that we link to. And so then what we're basically saying is when you click on that, we've already associated that list with it, so now use that. Then, once we do that, we come over to our Visio Web Parts, and we say we want to send shape data, and we want to send it to the other two lists that have the filters. So we're going to click on additional information. And we're basically going to say where the filter value is equal to the filter value. Because remember, we had a list called additional information. We had a bunch of different items in it. Well, I want them to be able, as they click through, I want to send them to different links. Well, the links that I want them to send, to go to are dependent upon the values in the list. So if I click on this, I may want to go see this type of data, but if I click on this shape, I may want to go see this type of data. So I actually have a list, and I'm building out this interactive dashboard that's going to be showing them live data by just using a couple of different filters. And to them, they don't even know that there's a list in the background. They just know that the list changes relevant to what they're clicking on. So it's a way that you can give users relevancy to the data that they're looking at. Okay? And with Webpart Connections, since we can do multiple connections on a page, I can also send it to the expense request list and do the same thing so that the items will show up based on the status of the items. So filter value is equal to request status. So I just have to know how everything relates back to that one list to say what the values are, and then they're going to be able to click through and find the right information. Okay. So when you're over here, and I click on the new request shape, it's going to come here and show me, oh, create a new expense request. So maybe there's a reason that I want to send them to create a new expense request, and I can see all of the items that have been created. When I click on these shapes, it's going to show me all of the ones that have been previously accepted or approved. So I see that they've been accepted and approved, and the additional links goes here. From this link, we can just say from the additional links, we see previously accepted request. If I was to come in here and edit this, whenever I change this list, the value in that dashboard is going to change. So I can come here, and I can add new items. And whenever I add these new items, then it's going to immediately be displayed on this page that can't be displayed. It's going to be immediately displayed over here when they open it. So remember when we talked about in the last session about the importance of kind of mocking up where that data needs to go? This would be one of those scenarios. So we have links that we want to give them to help guide them through the process. We want to give them a pictorial representation of the process, but at the end of the day, we really want them to just drill down and find the data and do something with it. So as a manager, I don't have to go digging through my email to find all of these things. I know that there's this dashboard. When I know and I want to go in and approve these requests, we can just go get into a meeting room, click on these different shapes, and find all of the things that I'm trying to do. Okay. We click on that, and again, it will filter and show us the authorized expenses. So we're able to give them the data relevant to what they're doing. So I don't know if you guys have a lot of executives that like to have those images, but if you've got a group of people that's really only coming together and they need to make quick decisions, they can get their minds around these dashboard type solutions, and we've really only utilized the features that we're already using inside of SharePoint. So how many of you guys are big Visio users? Are your organizations Visio users? No, not very many, just some of them? Okay, all right. So we have some of these different pieces here. Let me go back to my deck now. Okay. The data connections are what's going to give us the ability to connect together. We can do a lot. So there's a couple of different examples, and I can show you guys in my VM environment as well of some of the Visio services examples. But you can do different things with this that are going to allow you. So this is one where I said you could do KPIs. So this is one that's showing us where different things are at the phases with red, yellow, and green based on values. And then when I click on it, it's going to show me all the templates that I need to use for that phase. So this is the same type of example of what we just did, just with a little bit of an added flair to it because it has the KPI in it. So KPI is an interesting thing in an organization. Everyone tells me they need KPI, and then we have to go through the process of talking about, well, what is KPI? And then we find out that it means something totally different to every single person in the room, depending on what they want. So this is one of those examples where they, if they really just want to see, well, I want to quickly know what the status is of something, you can send them to a page like this, and you're simply using Visio to do this. They already recognize what the Visio diagram is, and now they have the extra colors and different things on top of it to really give them that data. And again, we want to drive the right behavior. So if we want to help ensure that they get the right templates and they get the right pieces, we've got one company that I know that is using this for their process management onboarding and for declaring processes and stuff like that. So they are simply sitting at a computer. You go, I need to see what the process is for procurement or something like that. And as I go click on all the phases, it's showing me all of the required documents that I have to fill out and everything in that stage. And so it's a very easy way to help users get the data that they need with very little training, because they're so used to seeing these pieces. We also have an example of a hospital. So there's a hospital that had a floor where the patients went through triage, and they had to go to all of these different rooms. And at any point in time, you kind of needed to know, well, what nurses were on and what patients were in what rooms. So a patient would come in the morning, they would get their name entered into a list, and whatever room they were assigned to, they would go. And as the nurses moved them from room to room, they would change the list data. Well, you could go to a diagram that was based off of Visio and click on a room, and at any point in time see all of the patients in that room. And so there's different things like that that allow you to quickly and easily get to the data. But again, we've not used any custom development. So we're able to build these diagrams, but we don't have to do any custom development. Do you guys have any questions on this or thoughts? Are your wheels turning of things that you could do? I can see some wheels turning. Which always makes me happy when I'm in sessions. Another thing that we can do here is, oops, I wanted to go one up. You can do highlighting shapes. So this is another one that is fun inside of Visio. If you ever wanted to do an office map to say, this is Karen and this is where Karen sits. So the reverse is also true. One of the connections you can do inside of Visio is say highlight a shape. So before we were saying click on a shape and do something to the SharePoint list. We can also do the opposite, which says click on this and then push it over to here. And so you can click on different names and it's going to highlight where they sit. So this is a fun little office map. We actually don't sit there like this. It's just people in my VM. Different things like that. So you can click on those and see those different things. So the idea is that I'm taking what I'm already doing and simply trying to enhance it with the tools that I'm already using no code. Okay? Visio is a great one because everyone loves visual. So you want to give people the ability to visually go through a process or do these different things. I use Visio a lot more than I actually used to, because I'll go in and say, oh, I need to guide them through this different set of processes. Well, it's a little flow chart, it's a little piece. I'll go create it in Visio, set up these filters, and then they can go through and get the data very easily. Okay, so whenever they click on the shape within the Visio diagram, the other web parts are filtered for that. So that is a great way to push information to them. So we've got two different things here. Here's the actions that I want them to do. These are the things that they need to do something with. But then above it, for the additional information, if you don't remember what you're doing, here's all the links you can click to find out exactly what it is you're supposed to be doing. So that's how I'm kind of cheating the system to kind of give them the best of everything. Because at the end of the day, I simply want my users to use the solution. And if they're not doing something, so in my example, this is a bunch of executives that get together once a month, once a quarter, once a whatever to review stuff. Are they going to remember how to use the system and what I want them to do? Probably not. So the more details that I can give them in an easy format, the easier it's going to be for them to interact with the system. And that if I'm doing this all of the time in all of the solutions that I build, they're eventually going to be going through this process of self-training because they're always doing the same things over and over again. And if I'm incorporating these things into the page so that they can quickly get to the pieces that they need, they're going to feel more secure in using the systems, because if they get lost on the page, they have their help directly on the page. And you don't have to go through a ton of trouble to build all of these other things because I'm just linking to other content that already exists. Okay. So the way to do this first is you created a custom list for the process phases. So in our case, we said, okay, I have a bunch of phases. You know, when I click on a shape, it means that something is in a phase. So whatever I'm using, if I was doing a project plan, the different stages in the project, those might be the pieces that I come up in there. If I was doing an office list, it would be the office location. So whatever that primary key is, I'm going to make a custom list inside of SharePoint for it. Now, I don't have to make a custom list. It could exist somewhere else. To me, I just find it easier because then everything can then be based off of that list. I then go into all of the other lists that need to somehow be linked to that, and I create what's called a lookup column. So I do a lookup column to that same value. So let's say I had templates that I wanted to display. I would go into the templates library, add a lookup column to the phases list that I just created, and then whenever I added a new template, I would say, what phase is this template associated with? Because then when I do the connections, when they click on the phase, it's going to just show that template. Okay? Then finally, I would go into Visio, and I would connect my process phases with the Visio diagram. That's where I would go to the Visio diagram. I would say connect to a SharePoint list or library, put in my custom list, and then say this shape is associated with this line item. And that's, once I do that, then I can just go onto the page and drop the web parts and get them to display to each other. Okay. So then when I'm here, I can put these web parts on the page and get them to display to each other. So when I have the different list with the lookup columns, okay, so we started here. We have our process filters list. So this is that step 1 that I talked about. We have a process filters list. So you can call it anything that you want to. I usually have something in terms of filter there so I know what I'm looking for later. And for these are the actual titles inside of my Visio shapes. The reason that I do that is because when I'm inside of Visio, I have this option where I can automatically link shapes. And so I can say based on the title and the text, if it equals to the title and the list, those are the ones that are linked together. So it will actually do all of the linking for me, which is pretty slick when you're looking at a large list or something like that. So it will do all of these pieces together. Okay. And then the items will be linked together. So from there, I can do different things. If I wanted to do data graphics, data overlays, different things like that. I can even go in and put, if I just wanted text or different things like that. So maybe I wanted to show just the status. I could come over here and pick, maybe just filter value, display it as text. Then I could say, well, where do I want it to be? What style do I want it to be? Maybe I want it to be a bubble call out. Where do I want it to be? If I don't want to use the default permission or position, where do I want to put it? Do I want to put it in the far right edge? And I can pick all of these things of what I want to do, and once I say OK and OK here, it's going to put that. I needed to actually highlight a shape. Okay, so I have the shapes that I want to do, then I'm going to insert my data graphic and just do that one. Okay, so it's going to put them on top of each other, show me the filter values for those different shapes. So obviously that doesn't look super great right now, but if you had a number, you had a specific piece of text you would want to put there, it can help you pull all of these pieces together to give you a unified experience with the data. Visio Services is probably, in my opinion, one of the most underused features inside of 2010. It's been there and hardly anybody realizes the power of what can be done with Visio Services just simply out of the box. There's a lot that can be done, but there's not a lot of places that really highlight the different things that you could do. And it's one of those things that if you don't know it exists, you're probably not going to just randomly come up and say, oh, Visio Services, let's start playing with this one. But now hopefully since you guys have seen it, you guys can start to think of examples in your organization of where you could go back and use this. So usually in the sessions I do like to say, does anybody have any examples of something that they have in mind right now that they could maybe use this for? Look, you first and then you, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, aside from your complex site collection
Yes.
structure, on the top side you have the whole, visualize the whole structure. So yeah, I'm in the process of doing more of that.
Yes, and then it would be a lot easier to manage inside of Visio, because then if you have to update it, you can just update the Visio and republish it. That's a really good one. How about you?
Yeah, with just my team, just all the requests coming in to do work from lots of different customers. And obviously we have governance meetings about what's priority and what's not. So just be able to go through where things are fit to stay.
Yes.
Very, very simply. And that's about 3 days.
Exactly, yes. And a lot of what I find with people when they do their Visio examples is it just brings simplicity to something that they're already doing. This just brings it together in a way that's fairly easy with not a lot of investment to do it. So did you have an example? I thought somebody else did. No? Okay. Yeah, I use this a lot on governance. So his example was SharePoint Governance and trying to figure out where pieces fit. I use this a lot for that. Okay. So once we go through this process again, we just save it back to SharePoint. I can show you guys that. It is just a file inside of a shared document library. So executive committee meeting, it's just a Visio file inside of a library. So nothing super special about this. All the connections are happening inside of Visio, and then it's stored just like any other document inside of that library. And then when I go to my page, when I'm on that page, all the power is really just done on this page. So this is just a Webpart page where we have different connected web parts on it. So we put the Visio Web Access one. If I wanted to add a new web part, I could simply click on it. Now I'm using Office 365, which is why this looks a little bit different if anyone's using any on-prem, but this is definitely, it's visually different, but it's the exact same functionality. So we're going to add our Visio web part there. Okay, so I have a blank Visio web part. I can simply come over here, edit the web part. Got the web drawing URL here, and I can click on my little ellipse, and then I can just go out and find the documents that's there. So I can go to shared documents. I can say which one do I want to have displayed. I click on it. I say OK. And then it's going to display that Visio diagram for me. Okay. I can force faster rendering, which means if there's a lot of complex things in the background, I can force it to load faster. I can fit all shapes in the view. This is going to be one of those things that's only available in Office 365. It's not necessarily available on-prem. So in 2010, in the web parts, you have to spend a little bit of time making the Visio diagram display correctly. It's not too painful. It's just most of my time has been spent making the shapes fit and making it look okay on multiple screens. I will say, though, in 2013, that process has totally gone away because there's a default button just like this that says, hey, no matter what size the page is, load the diagram to fit in that shape, and it's beautiful. It's a wonderful time saver. So we can go over there, and then I would say, what shapes do I want to expose? This is the secret to doing the Webpart connections, is saying what shape you want to have exposed. Okay? So I'm going to skip over that part right now and just come down here. I can also say what things do I want to have shown. So do I want to allow them to refresh it? Do I want to allow them to open it in Visio, show page navigation, show zoom? So I'll show all of these different things. If I go ahead and leave those there and say apply, give it just a second. Okay. You see I have all of this interactivity with it. So I could allow them to open it in Visio, they could refresh it. If I had multiple pages, they could come here and get the data. Again, there's nothing wrong with these settings. It all depends on how I want them to interact with the data. If I've only got one page, I don't necessarily need them to interact with that, so I don't want to show them that. If I don't want them to open it in Visio, because what did we say about buttons? If there's a button, they're going to click it. So if there's something there that says open in Visio, they're going to open it in Visio, even if it means absolutely nothing to them. And the zooming and the panning and different things like that. I usually always leave this one. This is your magic button inside of Visio, so you can train your users. If it doesn't look good, they can always hit that button and it will resize everything to fit within the page. So I usually leave that button there all of the time. And then if I get a user that's, changed their resolution or something and the screen just doesn't look right, they can always hit that. So even if I'm over here and say, ooh, let me zoom in, and then I'm like, oh, stink, I didn't really want to do that, I can click that and it's going to resize it for me. So it's a great emergency button for users. I wish it would just always default to that size, but sometimes if they can get themselves into a little bit of trouble, that button will get them out of trouble. Okay? Then I'm going to put it on the page and connect it with it. So this is the one on the bottom where I'm only showing the pan and zoom and different things like that. Again, because I want to drive behavior. But there might be certain times, think of engineers. Engineers who use a lot of Visio diagrams, I might want them to go to a page where they can preview it, and then if they decide they want to open it, then they're going to hit open in Visio. Well, one thing I know about Visio documents is they tend to be very large, very complex, and they don't tend to do anything quickly. So if I have a collection of Visio documents that I'm working with, but I don't know which ones I want to open, this is a way that I can almost preview them before I ever have to open them, which means I'm only going to have to take the time to open the ones that make sense, that I know what I'm opening before I go to do it. And if I get the right data at the right time, I'm a happier user by default. So these are some of the different things that you can use to add just an extra layer of functionality to your existing solutions. So in our case, we had our InfoPath form where we're collecting the data and setting a status with it. Now we're going to have these Visio diagrams that we're going to use to interact with the data to get us to do something with it. So this is almost like a presentation layer that's an integration between the existing Office products. Next, when we start to look at it, so when we come back after lunch, we're going to look at the actual automation of the process, which, okay, we're going to come to this page, and when we click on it, what actually happens when I kick off a workflow and I do something along those lines. So that's kind of where we're at in the process. And so what we really wanted to show in this series of workshops is really how you can take what you already know inside of SharePoint and really take it to that next level by just utilizing probably a lot of different things that you're already using, but combine them together into one complete solution. So I think we have about 15 minutes if you guys have any questions.